and want to be free. I would love your advice here. 2 questions. One would be, why should young men quit porn? And then what's your advice to young men who feel like it's just inevitable? Like I started when I was young. I've tried all the tricks and tips. I don't know how to stop. I keep promising myself I'll stop, only to go back like a dog towards a vomit. So first of all, why should they think about quitting porn first of all?
Well, no one ever quits anything. They replace it with something better.
Okay.
Right. I mean, so let's say alcoholism. Let's start with alcoholism. Well, why do people drink?
First of all, before we go further into this video, I wanna give my initial thoughts to what they're talking about. First of all, I think one of the main causes of guys, not just guys, but people get involved in watching porn, is them having too much time on their hands. First of all, you have to be busy. You can't just always be having a lot of time on your hands and be isolated and just not doing anything. Porn, alcohol, smoking, things like that are vices. They can become, if they get out of control, they can actually become addictions. So one of the ways in which you combat an addiction is that you don't have too much time on your hand where you have to think, or you have to fill in the holes, or you have to fill in the time. You have to find something else to do with that time, because ultimately you're going to result in doing your old habits. So I think the first way in which you combat your temptations in watching porn is by finding things to do, is by being busy, right? And I think actually porn is one of the dangerous things, because I think it alters how people view the opposite gender. If a guy is addicted to porn, I think he objectifies women a lot of times. Like he only sees women as sexual objects all the time. He doesn't think there's anything useful that they can do or that they can contribute into society by them, the values and the qualities that they have, by the only thing that he sees just, sexual objects. Something that you can just pump and dump. The opposite way you can say, if a woman is addicted to porn, it's almost like, I don't know. Man, I think porn can be one of, porn, alcohol, and gambling. Those are one of the worst addictions that you can have, especially as a man. Because I've actually heard stories of guys with regard to gambling. Guys gambling their whole households and going homeless because they gamble their house, or they gamble their cars, or they use their their savings, their life savings to gamble, getting destroying their whole lives over something like that. Now I can imagine if a guy is addicted to porn, what would happen? I mean, if you think about it, is that actually there's no way, in my opinion, that if you're married or you have a spouse, you can be addicted to porn, because obviously you have someone you can consummate with. But if you're single and you're over a certain age, then I can see how that can become a problem, especially in young guys, because I think guys actually get exposed to porn at a much more earlier age than they should be, and I think can become a very serious problem. So yeah, let's continue with this so we can hear what Jordan Peters has to say about it.
Well, if you like alcohol, that's a stupid question. Like, I really liked alcohol. It was pretty bloody obvious why I drank. Why? Well, it made my social relationships feel closer.
Yeah.
It woke me up. It quelled my anxiety. And it knocked out the part of my mind that was concerned with future consequences. So it was like impulsivity. So, like, you don't need an explanation for that. And some people are particularly susceptible to that alcohol effect. I had a colleague named Frank Irvin back at McGill, and he had a monkey ranch on St. Kitts, green monkeys, vervets, if I remember correctly. I think that's what they are. And he'd feed them rum and Coke. 5% of them would drink Tacoma on first exposure.
Okay.
right? 5%. It was like alcohol, huh, just like Barney Gumble in The Simpsons. Where have you been all my life? Right. Well, so how do people quit drinking? Well, no treatment centers work.
Really?
No, but people do quit. The most reliable cure for alcoholism is religious transformation. And that's been known even among the secular, what would you say, psychiatrists for like 80 years. Well, what happens when you decide you're going to do something other than drink? Okay. You got to get rid of all your friends. Because all your friends are drunks, right? You got to get rid of probably a fair chunk of your family. All of your social habits are wrong. Every single one of them. Everything you do that isn't work, that's alcohol related, that's your life. All that has to be replaced. You need a replacement. So I would say to young men who are listening to this podcast, for example, if you want to stop engaging in a self-destructive, impulsive, and juvenile habit, whatever it is, make a plan. We have a program online at selfauthoring.com called Future Authoring. It's like it helps you make a vision. So you're ashamed of yourself for some reason. That's why your conscience is calling at you. You know you're taking the easy way out. Okay. What are you being called to? Why are you plagued by doubts about the appropriateness of your behavior? Well, because something is beckoning to you. Well, what? An unrealized vision. So in the Future Authoring program, people are asked to, okay, so here's the deal. It's like a covenant. Here's the deal. 5 years from now, you can be who you would like to be, and you can have what you need within the bounds of reason, if you specify it. So if you could be who you would like to be, and if you could have what you think you need, in principle, what would that look like? Well, you start to specify targets. So we say, well, write it down for 15 minutes. Don't get too self-critical. Just think, we ask questions. Who do you admire and why? And what do you think you need and why? And what would you want if you could have it? And then we have people do the reverse. Okay, now picture yourself 5 years out and you've let your bad habits take full control, but you're 5 years older. Right. So what does that look like?
Yeah.
Well, it should be scary. Like, what's the little hell your whims are aiming at? So what are you? You're the 35-year-old creep at the bachelor party who's still involved with pornography, who still has the mind of a 16-year-old and is getting kind of perverse around the edges because everything he watches is getting a little more brutal, right? You're that kind of scum rat creep. That's your.
The other concern that I would have also, because you know what I think it is? I think just like any other thing or any other addiction is that I think it progressively gets worse as you go into it. Just for example, people who are drug addicts, when they first get into it, the things that they're into, they are mild, they are soft things, but over time they get into hard stuff, like fentanyl or shit like that. So I assume even it's the same thing with porn. I'm sure you start the things that you watch are just mild, easy, innocent stuff, but progressively you get into serious and things that can actually get you convicted and put in jail. Because I know that people who actually get convicted for child pornography, and you ask yourself, how, as a normal grown adult, how do you get into watching things like child pornography, which is insane to me. So I can see why, again, especially if you're of a certain age, you are much more older, like that, the shit can become a problem. It can really become a problem. So I get what Pierce is saying when he, Jordan Peterson, is saying when he says, especially if you watch brutal stuff, it can actually become a problem and, get progressively worse.
Destiny? You want that? Think about it. Think about exactly what sort of hell you'd involve yourself in. You bloody well know where your bad habits are likely to. Some people end up on the street. Some people women end up as hookers. There's addiction, there's pimping, there's like brutal cynicism. There's lots of hells. You have yours. You can be sure of that, where your temptation would lead you. You want to think that through and decide if that's where you want to go. And then when you're tempted, you can think, oh, that's a pathway to hell. Maybe no. Right? You need both of those. That's why in the archetypal realm, the moral landscape is anchored with heaven and hell. You need something to run the hell away from.
Yeah.
Right? Because that avoidance motivation, all that negative emotion, that's really useful.
Okay.
Like anger's part of that too.
Yeah.
You want to have that
Motivate
behind
you.
you.
Yeah.
Damn right. You want your fear, you want Satan behind you,
Yes.
pushing you forward.
Okay.
Right? Exactly. Not in front of you, barring your way.
But there needs to be something to run to.
Well, that's the other thing, is that gives you incentive pleasure, and that's exactly what drugs do. That's also what pornography does. Like technically, you experience a dopaminergic release in relationship to a goal. And when all the drugs of addiction produce dopaminergic release, all the bad habits, right? You got to replace that. Well, with what? Movement towards a valid goal. Well, what's your goal? Well, then we ask people in the program, it's like, okay, what do you want in a relationship? Like, if you could have what you wanted, what would it look like? Think about it, envision it, imagine it, let it reveal itself to you, right? How would you like to structure your friendships? What would you like to do to put your family in order? You know, how would you aim with regard to your career? How would you educate yourself? How would you take care of yourself mentally and physically, assuming you were, trying to do what was good for you, like you liked yourself, which is a very difficult thing to pull off. Yeah. How could you serve your community? Flesh it out.
Also, a massive thanks to Hallow for sponsoring.
I think this is a great conversation to have, because I think it can be very helpful to especially young guys. I think more young guys should watch content like this so that they can become more educated, so that even when they come across such content online, they make sure that they limit it or just avoid it in totality. Just avoid it, because I don't see any good coming from watching porn, doing drugs, or even gambling. I think those three things can easily get out of control. And as a person consuming it, you wouldn't even notice. So I think it's very, very important that, as young people in general, even young ladies, young girls, young women, whatever you want to call them, they need to be mindful of such content. And because it can become very destructive in their lives, in their, how they view people, how they operate with money, how they take care of themselves. So I think it's very, very helpful to have conversations like this. And yeah. So if you guys came across this video, please like and subscribe to this channel. And yeah, thank you for your time.